We are live for another edition of EverybodyHatesCleveland.com, the podcast hosted by yours truly, Jim Pete EHC. That's my Twitter handle because I push that a lot. I've got followers like you would not believe. 753, my friends. Something tells me, Mike, I just dropped to 752.
Hashtag Twitter cloud over there.
Oh, joining me as always is my main man, Michael Hattery. Michael, how the hell are you?
I'm great. Can we return to that topic for a moment? How much do you love when people are like, man, I only need 3 more for my 800? Or when they celebrate, hey, I got 500 today. I'm super cool because 500 people. I'm so thankful for you all following me. Who are you? Who cares? Who freaking cares?
So I've got to go delete a tweet I just made. Thank you, number 754. Ding! Those of you that are watching the vlog, you can see how happy I am. Oh, boy. Hashtag Twitter clout times 2, my friends. Hashtag Twitter clout times 2. Well, we actually had some news this weekend, Mike. We had Tribe Fest. Neither one of us went to it. However, there was a lot of interesting discussion with a lot of different people. I actually didn't hear anything from Chris Antonetti. So before I dive into some of this front office stuff, Mike, did you hear anything from Antonetti this weekend?
I don't think so. He was off in the wilderness.
Well, this is what's interesting to me, and I when news came out at the end of last year that we were changing our front office with Chris Antonetti getting bumped up to team president, Mike Chernoff becoming our GM. I was curious as to the dynamics of how that would look. Was Antonetti going to take on more of the role of president, or was he going to, as a guy who loves being a GM, is he, unlike Mark Shapiro, is he a guy who was going to become the president and still manage the on the field stuff, the player stuff? Or was he going to move away from that and as a 34-year-old Mike Chernoff takes over his GM job? My question was, what was his job going to change, or was he still going to be the right-hand man of Chris Antonetti? I guess my initial thought was that things were going to be pretty status quo, that Dolan was going to take over kind of the president role. Antonetti, although gets a bump in pay with the title, was going to maintain his general manager job, and Chernoff was going to become a GM in name only and essentially be a GM / assistant GM. However, it seems as though Chernoff was the mouthpiece this week. Antonetti was extremely quiet. It kind of resembled the relationship that Shapiro and Antonetti had once Antonetti took over the job as GM. Might there be some more change than we think? Might Chernoff have more responsibility than we think? What do you make of this, Mike? Am I just getting into this too much? Is it just that time of year, end of January, beginning of February, nothing else to talk about, so let's talk about the front office? Or might Chernoff have more responsibility than we think with regards to player movement?
I think that Antonetti is still what we would traditionally consider the GM. I think that Antonetti, I think really these two just got pay raises and different sort of position upgrades, but I don't think that there's anything substantive. I think worth noting when Francona spoke similarly to Chernoff about the Indians perhaps having 1 or 2 player acquisitions left in their offseason, Francona said, I think Chris has 1 or 2 things left up his sleeve. So I think the kind of implied nature of that is that I think Antonetti is still operating as the traditional concept of the GM, though he's now president of baseball operations and Chernoff has the title of GM. I think this is really just still a title bump and a pay bump, but the roles are very similar to what they once were.
So as you know, we were kind of talking on Twitter today. I think that, the intriguing piece to all of this is that as we move farther away from the John Hart tree, the roots of that tree being, Hank Peters, John Hart, folding into Shapiro, and then that whole group of players in the Indians front office that maneuver, the Huntingtons, the Burns, all these guys that have gone on to other jobs elsewhere. As we get further away, and now Shapiro's gone, and Chris Antonetti kind of takes over as kind of the I don't know, the fresh tree and the sapling of after Shapiro and after Hart and after Peters. Are you at all concerned that with the anchor gone, that this front office could start taking on a new look? For example, now you and I and many of the writers at EHC had a lot of discussion about reining in Terry Francona to a certain extent with regards to personnel. Now that his really good friend is gone, and now that just good friend Chris Antonetti remains, is there any concern whatsoever that maybe these sorts of things become more of an issue than they would have with Shapiro at the helm? Or will things get, I don't know if better is not maybe the best term, but will things maybe get better? Maybe Antonetti will have more control over outliers because he's not maybe as tight as Shapiro was. I don't know. What are your thoughts?
They definitely moved farther down the tree, and I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing. I like Mark Shapiro a lot, and I think he did some things well. But to me, on a sort of baseball operations standpoint, I think I trust Antonetti much more in terms of his decision-making ability, in terms of his acquisitions in the past. I think he's been much more competent, and in terms of his vision of where the Indians should be, he's more competent. There are flaws. I mean, he's made mistakes. I'd like to have seen him be more aggressive this offseason. But I think on the whole, I trust them more. As to the relationship with Francona, I definitely think that it could change, and I think that that's a positive thing. I think that both Chernoff and Antonetti are incredibly professional people, from everything that people outside the organization say and from other organizations. But I think having a good balancing relationship with Francona is key. I think Francona is a very good manager, but I think having someone who feels confident enough to challenge his manager and disagree professionally is important, and I'm not sure that was occurring enough when Shapiro was over Antonetti and Antonetti was running baseball ops, kind of interacting with Terry. And now that he can run baseball ops without having Shapiro's oversight, because Shapiro was really just kind of overseeing baseball ops and mostly working on the business side, I think that dynamic could change a little bit, certainly.
So I guess all this stems from, Chernoff and Francona both were talking yesterday during the Tribe Fest, and out of their interviews came kind of a mimicked kind of comment, and we've seen this in the past with regards to the Indians with how they've approached the press. Both stated that they were still looking to potentially add one or two more players. Whenever the Indians say that, it's hard to gauge what they mean. With February coming upon us, the Michael Bourne signing close to Valentine's Day comes into mind, where the Indians were able to get a at the time seemingly a bargain with Michael Bourne. There are still some interesting names out there, so I guess as we move forward with this discussion, Mike, they mimic this comment of adding these players. Do you see it happening? I mean, is a Fowler potentially possible for center? Is adding on to third base? Uribe is still out there. A lot of talk about Desmond from the Nationals still out there. Of course, a draft pick would be attached to him. Freese is still out there. Is this possible if the Indians don't get a great deal? And when I say a great deal, I'm talking about that number that they seem to really come in at, like that $6 to $7 million a year kind of thing. If that deal's not out there, are they standing pat, or are we going to potentially see a 1 or 2 year, $20 million deal for one of these guys?
I think, each case is really, really different. But I would bet they're doing like what you're saying, and I think they're in a really good position with David Freese and Juan Uribe, who essentially have very, very limited markets. No one's been attached to them. Teams aren't really proactive on the third base market. I think the Indians are in a situation where they've been probably telling Uribe, because they've been in talks with Uribe, what their number is for probably about 3 weeks, and Uribe hasn't gotten a better offer yet. He hasn't gotten another number. I think they're sitting there waiting with a number until it's February 5th or it's February 10th, and Juan Uribe says, I want to be in camp with somebody, or David Freese says, I want to be in camp, and takes that offer. So I think the Indians are in a tremendous position to kind of sit and force a player to take much under what their market value is, because they made it to this point in free agency. I think that's possible. I think the Fowler and Desmond thing is much, much less likely, mostly because I can't think of a contract that makes sense with them. I think both of them with the draft pick attached, you don't want to do 1 year. And they're both people that I'm pretty adverse to going like 3 years on, which is what you'd have to do. And I'm not super comfortable with it. And I'd be really surprised if Antonetti was comfortable doing 3 and 40 for Fowler, 3 and 36, and losing a draft pick. That just shocks me as weird.
I think, I'm more than willing to lose a draft pick if you're getting a player that you can guarantee is going to be a factor on your team for multiple years. You look back to, of course, the big signings of Swisher and Bourne, where we thought we were going to get some sort of draft pick value. We lost a second and a third round pick with those signings. We got essentially half of a year of Bourne being any good and not much more than that with Swisher, if more than that. I think they're going to be tentative anyways with regards to a deal like that. I just don't see Desmond, Fowler or anybody that's out there attached to a draft pick right now as having any sort of value when it's going to cost you a first round pick.
Yeah, that's the thing. I think there are a lot of different sort of metric ways we've tried to value a first round pick, but usually for the Indians pick, it comes down to being worth like $10 to $15 million for a team like the Indians this pick. And so when you look at Desmond, if you're going to do a 1 year pillow deal with him, it's without a draft pick attached, it's like 1 year and $15 million. Like if you're paying Desmond more than like 1 year and $5 million and losing a pick, like it's not going to be that great a value for you. It just isn't. So you have to go multi-years, and I just don't think either of those guys are really worth losing a pick over. Desmond, I think about it a little bit, but I don't know.
Well, and I guess at the end of the day, when you talk about that kind of money and you look at internal options for the Indians, especially third base, again, we talked about this. There are some people around social media who like to just grab a player from one position and plug them into another. And I'm not saying that I haven't been akin to do that, although Jason Kipnis did actually play in the outfield. I think that there is a guy. I mean, I think a guy like Jose Ramirez, an excessively cost-effective deal, could be plugged in at third base at any point and be comfortable there. Not to mention the fact that Yandy Diaz is a guy who's sitting in Columbus right now, who probably defensively could play there right now, and has kind of that utility feel to him, kind of moving up. It feels like the Indians have some internal guys that could fill in the role that would be a whole heck of a lot more cost effective than a guy like Desmond to begin with. Uribe seems to me like a guy you can get for $7 to $8 million at the end of the day. I just don't see anyone going higher than that.
Yeah, I think,
maybe even 6.
I've talked to a couple of people I know, like I've talked to Adam Burke and August, and we all, you have the same opinion. I think I originally was saying 8 or 9. I was saying I think Uribe would cost 8 or 9, but I think you're right. I think you could get him for 5 or 6 and be done. And I think what you talked about, I love Jose Ramirez getting a lot of time at third. not sure I buy into as a full-time starter, but I might. He's tremendously talented. He has speed, defensive value, and that's going to get better because, he's only 23 years old and he's already been productive in the big leagues. But whatever, that's something else. But
well, and we're ignoring Giovanni Urshela, and I'm doing that on purpose. I know you're working on something with him, but we're ignoring Giovanni Urshela, who, has really not done anything to make us think he can't play the position. I know he struggled last year. There were some injury issues. I do think they brought him up too early as opposed to Lindor, who they brought up too late. But again, we're ignoring Urshela, and we'll get into him at a later date. But I'm not necessarily thinking we have a big hole at third base. It's just, if you can get Uribe for less than $8 million, that's a must get, right? I mean, even if we're pushing this out, even if we're pushing our cap up to close to 90 million or over 90 million, if you can get Uribe as a plug-in, pretty good defender, even at 36, you got to go out and get him, right? I mean, this is the kind of move you make if you're going to win a World Series.
Yeah, so I think if you look at how the position projects right now, Urshela projects at like half a win, and Uribe projects between 1.5 and 2.3. And moving a win to a 1.5 up the win curve, especially with how the Central's position, really ups your odds of being in the playoffs. It ups them probably 5 to 9% if you make a sort of move. All right, that's aggressive. Probably 3 to 7%. It ups your odds, but your playoff odds. But that's significant, and for a pretty cheap cost. And I think it's a pretty easy assumption to make that, J-Ram and Uribe at third base gets you 2 to 3 wins, and J-Ram Urshela maybe like 1.5. That's a really clear upgrade. And then but you have one glaring hole in center, and Almonte has some upside there. You can run with that and mix and match and make an in-season deal to upgrade center field if you want to, because there are a lot of outfielders who are kind of fringe on the market in the offseason that didn't get moved, and you bet they're going to be available at the trade deadline. And the Indians are going to have even more young pitching prospects who have reached higher levels of the system. So you're going to have a team with a ton of assets and one hole.
I'm going to one up you on this one, Mike, and I'm going to go this far. I'm going to think this way. It would be nice to get a center fielder of value, and I would go out on a limb and say, if the Indians go out and get a Uribe or get somebody to play third base, they have all these malleable pieces that we were talking about. I'll do you one more. We talked about the front office, and we'll kind of close it up after this, but, kind of coming full circle here, talking about the front office. The one thing about Chris Antonetti that has always tantalized me was that he was the motor behind the Ubaldo Jimenez deal. And, a lot of people have a lot of feelings on Ubaldo Jimenez, but at the end of the day, it was his pitching that led us to the playoffs in 2013. Taking that into mind, I really am starting to wonder about the way they're piecemealing kind of these holes, with the idea that potentially sometime in July they could pull a trigger. Now, think about this. If you've got a couple of guys who can play third, a couple of guys who can play first, a couple of guys who can play catcher, with a boat full of prospects, and I think considering what we see, we've got 3 guys in the top 100 of Baseball America. I think you could make a case with Sheffield, with Aiken, and a couple of others, Kaminsky perhaps coming back this year, rebounding, and we can throw out some other arms and some other positional players. Bradley, of course, and the two outfielders, and Frazier and Zimmer. You could make a case that the Indians in July, if they're in contention, could not only go out and get a pretty good piece, but could use a Zimmer. And again, I know this is going to freak people out, but kind of hear me out here. Could use a Zimmer to go out and get an Ozuna if he's playing well. Could go out and get a guy with 3 or 4 years of control who could be a game breaker and still be with the team for 3 or 4 more years, but out of a position of power. Does that make sense? I mean, could you see the Indians doing that? And this is where I think the front office may shift a little away from Shapiro in a way that may excite fans a little more.
Yeah, I think the Indians are just in. If the Indians are above water, if the Indians are above 500 at the break, which is going to be a really good position considering how mediocre the American League is, you're going to have a young well, a solid MLB core. You're going to have depth at catcher. You're going to have depth on the middle infield with Ramirez. You're going to have this first base DH depth. Then you're going to have one of the top 5 to 7 systems in Major League Baseball in terms of prospect assets. And you're going to have more pitching depth than almost any team in Major League Baseball. So you go in to the break area in really good position. You have tons of assets to make a kill move. And we saw the Royals do this. They set themselves up where they were in good position, and then they make the Cueto and Zobrist kill moves, where they really add talent, try and separate themselves in the second half. And the Indians have the talent to be there in July in an advantageous position, and they have the talent to blow the lid off of Central in terms of assets to move.
Well, and that's the thing. And, we still have to see what Trevor Bauer has in the tank. We still have to see what Cody Anderson has in the tank. We still have to see, as we talked about TJ House last week, what does he have in the tank? I mean, asset-wise, if things even tilt towards the positive, our basket's going to be quite full when it comes to July. I'm going to need coaxing to believe that they're actually going to do something, though, because I'm not appeased by our holes right now. And I'm curious as to see if we trend up or we trend down heading into May, June, and July deadline. For trending down, will the Indians try to do something to turn the tide, or will they chalk in the season? This is my concern. My concern is we come out of the gate slow, and then we don't do anything, and then we get to July, and we're in that middling position where we don't buy, we don't sell. And that's my concern. We're wasting a window with these starters if that happens. I think the positive point that we're trying to make here is that they could be in that royal position where they make big splash in July. Before we wrap things up, Mike, one last question. Percentage chance that the Indians make a move in the next 2 weeks before pitchers and catchers report?
95%. The Indians are going to sign Juan Uribe within the next 2 weeks, and you can take it to the bank.
There you have it. I'm going to say, I'll just go with my pessimist self. I'll go 7%. And I'll leave it at that. I built the Gio Urshela bandwagon. I built it. Go Gio. Screw all these old guys who are younger than me, but that's beside the point. They have to address center field. They have to address center field. They don't have a guy to play regular center field, and I'm just not buying Rajai Davis as our regular center fielder. And if Brantley's hurt until June, hopefully he's back at opening day, as I've been hearing reported, which is ridiculous. But got to fix center field. No offense, Abraham Almonte. I just don't buy it. So that's the position I'm concerned with. That's the position I hope we address at some point. So I'm less concerned about third, more concerned about our outfield. But I digress. With that said, we're going to throw this one into the coffer. We'll have this podcast up. Hopefully you're listening to this and smiling on Monday or swearing at us on Monday. That wouldn't be anything new. We'll have a lot of podcasts going up this week. We have positional values coming up for catcher and first base with regards to the lineup as we head into spring training with the rest of the positions for the Indians coming up shortly thereafter. Hopefully we'll get all those done before the middle of February. If not, you'll hear them throughout spring training. And, of course, they'll alter as the team alters itself heading towards opening day. With that said, Mike, this is our third podcast in 2 weeks. This is amazing. It's almost like we're friends. Hello, friend.
Hi. We're going to be friends until you read my Gio Urshela column, which comes out this week, which people should look at and also realize that they're balancing perspectives. That's all I have to say.
I don't even know where you're going with this. I'm hoping for the best. You're saving me having to write a Gio Urshela piece. I just want the guy to stay healthy. I just want to see one full healthy season of Giovanni Urshela. The guy's got a pretty good baseball IQ. And, he's got his boy there with Francisco Lindor. So, man, I can't wait to talk a shortstop with you, my friend. Francisco Lindor, one full season, but that's for another day. With that said, thanks for joining us. Make sure you check out everybodyhatescleveland.com this week. We got a lot of good stuff going up, including Mike's piece on Giovanni Urshela at some point. I'm guessing Tuesday, Wednesday, something like that. We have 3 podcasts, counting this one going up this week, maybe more. I'm going to be writing a piece. We have a second piece going up on all-time Indians. I should have a third base piece going up sometime late in the week. Make sure you catch out those. I have all-time catchers up, all-time first baseman up. I have all-time second baseman that just went up today, altered from the days of IBI. Definitely written much better. So make sure you check those out. And, just check out the site. As the baseball season gears in and as basketball playoffs gear in, we'll be talking a lot about both. So make sure you check into that. We didn't even talk about the Cavs today, and they actually looked pretty good last night, but that's for another day. We shall stop there, because then I'll veer into Johnny Manziel territory, and I just don't want to go there either. So with that said, go Cleveland. Have a great weekend. Have a great week. We'll see you guys sometime later. Peace. Later.